United with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Life Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, United with Christ.
Good morning and welcome back. I'm Wally Chapman and we're doing a course on church history. This week we're going to look at something I think that will fascinate you, and you'll find it really great. And I'm not just going through century by century. We're taking a subject today, which is science, and we're going to look at how it developed and how it came all the way till today, and how it was being affected by the mindset of the people who were doing the science work. You know, anything can be proved if you're trying to prove it. You can find the evidence to back whatever you want. So we're going to look and see how it happened, how humanism came into the science world and changed it, and how moving away from a biblical standard brought some real problems. This area science became a real challenge to the Roman Catholic Church. As we saw in the Middle Ages and the Reformation, the church was totally in charge of everything. And they had their traditions, they had their plans, and now science is starting to discover things that were not known before, and it caused all kinds of problems. Part of that problem was Aristotle had a lot of influence in the doctrine of the Catholic Church, and he had brought back into Greek philosophy of Socrates and Plato, and some of the thinking of the mindset of the world system that they had before. The church had left that at the beginning, but now there became a system of you have tradition and you have the Bible. And so if one of them conflicts with the other, then you've got to do a synthesis of all of that. And so now Aristotle's theology had brought into the church so much, and the power of the church so much, that when you have things that are contradictory, you now have to deal with it. And many times they didn't deal with it correctly. Galileo in 1609, the telescope was discovered, and he showed a whole new world to everyone, the stars, the moon, and he said that this didn't contradict the Bible because God created it all. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. And so Galileo was saying, look at where we're finding. Look what's there. And because of the traditions and the mindset of the culture, in 1632, he was condemned as a heretic by the church. Copernicus was another scientist that was there, and he said that the earth rotated around the sun. Well, this was heresy, because everybody knows that the sun comes up in the east and goes down in the west, so it must circle the earth. And so he was condemned. Pascal was an interesting man. He developed the first barometer. And how that happened was he climbed a mountain with Mercury and saw that the level changed as he went up the mountain. And so there was barometric pressure that needed to be dealt with. And he said, he was a French prose writer, and he said that Christ died for mankind, therefore man had value to God, and man can contemplate. He can think things out. He can look at things because God made him in his image, and we're able to see God through creation. Isaac Newton was another man dealing in the science. You remember the guy with the apple on his head and was going to be shot with an arrow? Well, that wasn't his basic fame. His fame came by discovering gravity. And he said that it was universal and that everywhere you had gravity. And if you jumped off a building, you're going to fall to the earth. Another thing he developed was the speed of sound. And he did that by echoes. He went to a canyon and he would make a noise and then see how long it took for the echo to come back and how fast the sound was moving. These men all did this, and yet they were considered way out. All of them had a faith in God or believed in the basic principles as they were going. Francis Bacon, he stressed that observation needs to be carefully documented so that when you look in science, you'll find things through as long as you document them, because God created the world and He's not going to mess up in any way. It's going to all fit in, so don't be afraid to go and document the facts. So he set up a systematic collection of facts that people would start using. Michael Faraday was an experimental scientist, and his major discovery was the induction of electric current. And he says, as a Christian, he believed that God's creation was for all men to understand and not just the scientific elite. So let's bring it into the point where you and I can understand science. All of this was happening in a period of decades as people were starting to see this creation that God had made and how wonderful it was. Whitehead had set out a biblical foundations for the scientific revolution. He moved with confidence. Christians have the base of modern science as possible because we have a standard with a God who is faithful and who is consistent. So all of this is going to fit in. And what a difference it started making in the lives of people, because science was now all coming together and finding new stuff that many people found very uncomfortable, and the church, the Catholic Church, found it very difficult to deal with because it was going out of the way. And for humanists, it was a place, wow, look at all this world that we've got, and it'll destroy the church at the same time. Not all the early scientists were Christian, but they built on a Christian base. And the emphasis was on an ordered creation, that it is all in order, and so they will go and will build it. And if it's ordered, then the next step and the next step and the next step can follow and can go along. Einstein's theory of relativity, that light travels at a constant speed everywhere, and therefore you can measure how far away a star is by how long it takes for the light to travel, or vice versa. You find the distance, then you can tell how long it will take for the light to get there. And we still use that today. So the conflict that was coming in science now was, do we live in a closed system or an open system? The humanists said it's a closed system, that the system has no God, no one from outside is coming in and changing things. Therefore, everything that you see is what is. And therefore, you can't expect miracles to happen. You can't expect God to get involved. Man is the peak of all creation. We have reason, we have smarts, and we will take care of all of that. And so this closed system, you just had man as an animal. And so man is no different to the rest of the animals. Think about that. What's been taught in our culture is that we're no different to the rest. We're just an extension of the rest, and we'll look at Darwin in a moment. But man is not made in any image. He's just an animal. Now, if we're just an animal, then what does that say about us? What does it say about our thinking, our dealing with anything? We can be manipulated. Whereas the biblical system is an open system that says God is involved, He can intervene, He has a purpose, and we're not trapped in a process. We have freedom. We are open to have things happen. All that exists is not a total cosmic machine. It's not just set in order and then just keeps going. It's not a machine. It's human choices have meaning and effect. It's not closed off. You and I can make a difference. We're not just robots that are going along. And the cosmic order of the stars and everything else isn't a threat. It's part of an overall picture of what God has created. And it's all in order and all set out. You see, our biblical system in our space program has worked because it's ordered, and we can send people to the moon. We can put a little box of material out in the sky and then send a rocket to it. The Space Lab is there, and people can get on it and off of it, and because everything is in order. So the humanists want to say we can do these things, but it's all man that's doing it, and only want to have order when it's comfortable and when it's there. You see, the humanistic and the scientific change has not been a science change, it's been a philosophical change, where they have their mindset of what they want. And so if man is in charge and I have a theory, then I'm going to find the facts to fit into my theory, whether they're the major facts or the minor facts. And people keep saying, follow the science, but yet so much of the science is not being followed because of people's ideas and traditions. As the Catholic Church wouldn't change as science came, many of the humanists today will not change even if science changes. So we're going to look at the effects of, if you have a closed system, which there's no God involved, then life can become pointless. Why am I here? I'm just here till I die, and that's the end of it. There's no place for the significance of man, that we're above all. God said that we're to have dominion over the earth. It doesn't mean ruling like a dictator, but it means that we're the top and we're to do the leadership and make sure we look after it. But in the closed system, that doesn't happen. We're created in the image of God in the open system. In the closed system, we are not. There's no base for morals in a closed system. Since we are all just animals, we just do whatever we want. Does that not explain why we have free love? Does it not explain why we're saying all different genders aren't working? It says because there's no moral base. There's not anything that is there. And animals don't love, so why worry about what love is? Whereas in the open system where the Bible is there, God's love, and we're to love each other. But in a closed system, we're just animals that are to act out, and makes life void of meaning. So let's look at Darwin and see what happened when Darwin came. He went to the Galapagos Islands. He saw some lizards come out of the water and onto the land, and these iguanas were there, and he said, wow, it must be that we've transferred from lower species to higher species. And so he said that my theory will be proved or failing by the fossil record. By those things that are in the fossils, you'll see that there's a transition from one species to another. Well, to this day, there has not been one fossil that has been found that has transitioned from one species to the other. There have been some changes within species, but nothing that has gone to prove his theory is right. All that is evidence right now is to prove that his theory is not right. So let's look at the dinosaurs, for example. You know, many times in Christianity, we said, well, dinosaurs couldn't have existed, they couldn't have been around, and that's a real threat to our faith. Yet they've discovered dinosaur bones all around the world. And it's really interesting that because of the dinosaur bones, they have been able to really disprove evolution. Now remember, if you have a theory and you're a humanist that doesn't believe in honesty, who's not believing in what you want, you're not going to listen to some of these things. But the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas, they've just opened a brand new museum there. If you can go to Dallas and see it, you'll see some of these facts that I'm going to tell you. They have found that as they've discovered fossils of dinosaur bones, they have found collagen in them. Collagen is in the blood, and they're still seeing blood in the bones of fossilized dinosaur bones. Now, this is very significant because with the rate of dissolving blood, and it shouldn't be there if it's 40 million years old, because by the time you get to about 10,000 years after something has died, there's no blood in it. But they're finding a protein, the collagen, is still in these bones. And so these dinosaurs can't be 40 million years old. They've got to be less than 10,000 years old because of the, let me look at the name of the, it's called a spectroscopy, which shows the design and the blood that is in there and how long and its age and how fast it has dissolved. And this blood in the first half, it doubles in disintegration at the very beginning and then it slows down, but there's still blood there. So if the theory of evolution is correct, and all these millions and millions of years where everything had to fall into this period of time, they're saying that as long as you have more time, you can prove anything. Well, here it's less than 10,000 years for this. And if you want to do more research, go to Creation Institute, Research Institute in Dallas. They'll give you a lot of this. They've got magazines out all the time. But it's interesting. We got to look at the facts and check the science. So now we're looking at the facts and checking the science and finding out that much of the science is haywire. It's not right. It's a philosophical change. It's not a factual change. So in humans, there are many changes, but if you have a Darwinian or a humanistic society, then you have no absolute moral code. So with this, the controls are by the person who's in leadership. Example, look at the Nazis. During World War II, their situation was, we're going to have a powerful superhuman race, and it's going to be all Anglo, all white, all blonde, and we're going to breed this super race. The Chinese are trying to do that today with their army soldiers. And it doesn't matter what anybody thinks, because there's no boundaries to what they do. And within our culture, in the last 50, 60 years, we have had people doing all kinds of weird things in science because you don't respect the humanity being made in God's creation. You don't respect what people are. And so one of the issues has been the abortion issue. Let's just get rid of that tissue because it's not really a person. We're just animals at a further stage of development than the others. But let's go back to what's been going on back in the late 1900s. Pavlov was earlier than that, but he was a psychologist, and he proved that he was showing that man can be manipulated by behavior. And everybody who has done some biology has run across Pavlov and his dog. And Pavlov's dog he had him in a cage, and Pavlov, every time he rang a bell, a food pellet would drop down to the dog. And as he did this, he conditioned his dog that every time the bell rang, he would salivate. So after a while, the bell would ring, no food pellet would come down, but his mouth would salivate, ready to have it. And Pavlov was saying, this is what you can do to people. They're just animals, just like a dog. We can do things to manipulate the culture so that the people will be able to do what we want them to do. And so in this process, Pavlov's dog behavioralism began, and in the psychology world became very strong for a long period, and still is in some areas, that you can create changes in people by creating things to make their behavior change. And over a period of time, you can condition people to think a certain way, to act a certain way. And we're seeing it in our culture if you start looking around. Another man by the name of Kessler said that we should tranquilize all people to control human behavior. So because there's aggressive people, if we put something in the water supply or we gave people who are aggressive a certain medication to slow them down, we wouldn't have a problem. But he didn't have any problem doing it as long as we could control the society. Clark and Lee were people that they said you need to give pills to our politicians to stop their aggressiveness. Well, it's interesting if you stop and look at it, that a politician who is aggressive generally doesn't have a moral base in their life. I'm just saying generally. But if you have a biblical base, you're generally not going to do the things that the others are going to say that you're going to do, because you say, I shouldn't kill. I should respect other people. You know, I don't do those things because they have that biblical base in their lifestyle. Kermit Cranky was an interesting person. He was, Joseph Fletcher then followed him in the 80s. I was in a seminar, and he said, what Cranky said was that we need to control the people in our society. So we should make sure that too many of the poor people and the undereducated are having more babies than are the educated and the wealthy. Therefore, we need to control society. So what he was suggesting was that they put a birth control in all the water systems so that everyone would become sterile. And then those people who we want to have children will put a filter in their water supply at their home so that they can become pregnant and have healthy, wise children to populate our culture. Sounds a lot like Hitler, doesn't it, in his super society? But this was promoted. And Fletcher said, we ought to do it. It would make a big difference in our culture, that we would be a better society. So the problem is, who controls the controllers? Those who are trying to control who has babies, who's going to control them? We have no absolutes. We have nothing going on. Maybe you get this super psychological person who becomes the king and dictator of a country, and then you just control all of those. But see, what happens when you have no moral base is that anything goes, and people can try it all. So we have references. We got to go back to original science. We've got to chase the facts. So now I want to spend some time looking at specifics of countries that have made it or haven't made it because of biblical basis and where they are. And James Kennedy wrote a book, and his comment in the book was, every country is controlled by their religion. You look at the religion and you'll see what it does to the people. And it's very, very true. It controls what's there. The Industrial Revolution that we talked about a little earlier, about all of this, was really important because there was a movement across the earth where the British Empire was everywhere. In fact, there was a saying that said, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And because of that, all these discoveries that were made in the Industrial Revolution went around the world. And people just spent time distributing and taking what was done in the West that was never there. Think about it. There's no development in Saudi Arabia. They have cars, they have oil, they have the water desalination plant. All have come from the West. They haven't done it themselves. As the West spread, and because of biblical principles, you could discover things, these people are getting all of those things. You go to Afghanistan. I talked to a man in Afghanistan who was an engineer and a geologist. He said that Afghanistan has all the minerals in the world except for two, diamonds and platinum. So yet Afghanistan is the second poorest country in the world. Why? Because of their system, because of their fighting of their tribes, because of all the things that are happening that are there. Russia was so bad, when we were leaving Russia, there was a pastor under their socialized medicine who was in the hospital. He had his liver operated on. They said they didn't know if he was going to live for the next surgery, so they didn't sew him up. 3 days later, he went back into surgery, and they had to do some more later, and they didn't sew him up again. His wife had to come in and give his meals, had to change his clothes, and I found out as we were leaving, he had no pain medicine. Now, can you imagine lying with your whole body wide open and in pain, And $5 that I had in my pocket would have covered all the medicine that he needed. But I was on a plane leaving him when I first heard about it. We've got to look to see what the value of people are and what's there. And then in Russia, I was with an interpreter, and I got to do this quickly. We were on a train. He said, look at those fields. They're all bare. In 3 months, they'll be loaded with tomatoes. And in 5 months, they'll be loaded with rotten tomatoes because we have no distribution system. We have no way to can the tomatoes. And therefore, they'll be dead. The saying in Russia is, the government pretends to pay us, so we pretend to work. And 1/3 of the crop was done by individuals who had a little bit of dirt, and they grew their crop and sold it to continue their existence and to keep themselves paid for. All of this is in systems that don't have a biblical base, that do not value the people that are in their country, and therefore those in charge are in charge, and the rest they don't care about. They just want to use it for their benefit. Those in leadership of the humanist society are after themselves, their power, and what they can get out of it, and that they have the control, not concern for the interest of people. As I say that, take notice, if you're living in America, of what's happening. It's all changing in the same way that those in power want what they want, and they're not worried about everybody else as long as they get their piece of the action and as long as they have power. It's as we have moved away from a biblical standard to now a humanistic standard, we now have people who are using that philosophy to control where we are going and what we are doing. Be aware, when there's no moral basis and no absolutes to the society and no God, hope is gone for the majority. And in America, the hope, unless we continue to do what we're doing and get back to a biblical basis, we Christians, and get off our lazy backsides and start standing for the principles that we say we believe, we'll go right down the drain, and so will our children and our grandchildren. This is really important. So you as a Christian, if you're watching this, or if you're not a Christian, give your life to Christ and start following Him, because it will change, bring back as a revival as we go and serve our Lord here in this land. It means sacrifice. It means doing something. But please don't miss out and don't become lazy. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week, and God bless you.